Top 10 gemstones that dropped after global sanctions. They didn't crack. They weren't fake. And in most cases, they weren't even rare. These are not the gemstones that failed under a microscope. They're the ones who lost access. From deep inside Myanmar's conflict zones, to the frozen diamond fields of Siberia, to cutting centers in India suddenly running out of rough, global sanctions didn't just change who could buy or sell. They rewired value itself. In this episode, we're tracking 10 gemstones that once dominated auctions, headlines, or export charts until political pressure, supply chain breakdowns, or documentation failures took them off the table. Some still shine, some still sell, but none of them trade the way they did just a few years ago. If you thought gem prices were all about rarity and beauty, what happens when the laws change and beauty isn't enough? Don't forget to press and hold that like button, leave a comment, and hit subscribe before we begin. Ranked 10th, Opal Ethiopia, the color-shifting gem the world stopped trusting. High on the volcanic plateau of northern Ethiopia, beneath layers of ancient ignimbrite, lies a gemstone whose behavior challenged conventional gemology and reshaped market expectations in just a few years. This is hydrophane opal, a porous variety so absorbent it changes color when exposed to water. The transformation isn't a trick of the eye. It's a shift in optical density where absorbed moisture alters how light moves through silica spheres, turning a pale, matte surface into a blaze of internal fire. That same property, however, makes hydrophane notoriously difficult to stabilize. It may dazzle under showroom lights but become brittle or fade in long-term wear. For gemologists, it's a geological curiosity. For traders, it's a risk. Discovered in the Mazezo region during the 1990s, Ethiopian opal only reached global attention after 2008, when new deposits emerged near Vegaltena in Wolo. These stones flooded the market with vibrant hues and attractive prices, often 30 to 50% cheaper than Australian opals. By 2013, Ethiopia had become the world's second-largest opal exporter, drawing buyers from China, India, and the Gulf. But rapid growth outpaced regulatory capacity. Most opals were mined by hand, exported raw, and left the country without cutting, polishing, or certification. When Ethiopia introduced its 40/60 rule, requiring 40% of value-added processes to be done domestically, international traders began pulling back. The infrastructure wasn't ready, skilled labor was scarce, and enforcement at the borders was porous. As the official channel slowed, unregulated routes flourished, smuggling became common. Stones left the country without traceability or processing, flooding secondary markets and suppressing prices across the board. By 2021, despite recording over $2.6 million in opal exports, the per-carat value of Ethiopian hydrophane was falling. Large retailers in the US and Europe grew hesitant. In the wake of tighter global scrutiny, especially after Russian diamond sanctions, few were willing to deal in stones that couldn't be independently sourced, graded, or guaranteed. According to reports by the World Bank and regional mineral studies, price erosion was no longer cyclical. It had become structural. From a high of nearly $300 per kilo for rough material, prices dropped to as low as $100 or less for uncertified lots. And with rising customer concerns over durability, even well-cut hydrophane lost its premium positioning. This wasn't a collapse driven by embargoes or war. There was no singular sanction. Instead, a confluence of global forces, tightened export policies, unstable supply chains, domestic trade restrictions, and post-pandemic risk aversion quietly pushed hydrophane opal out of the international spotlight. Production continues. Mines remain active. But a gemstone once hailed as the greatest opal discovery of the 21st century now trades at half its former value, burdened more by lost momentum than lost color. Ranked 9th, Peridot from Pakistan, a gem the market left behind. Mochan Desert
Across the rugged
spines of the Western Himalayas in northern Pakistan, market jewelry. Amid peaks carved by Pakistan's tectonic
Kohistan
upheaval,
district
lies a gem
famous
born
for
of
high-grade
high-grade
peridot.
with rich
Peridot from the
saturation
Sapat
and good
Valley in
transparency,
Khorasan
emerged
yet
in the
also
early
exports
1990s
large
as
volumes
something
of
rare,
paler,
impeccably uniform olive feeds into the global supply chain, often surpassing Peridot's history once carried far greater symbolic weight. Unlike the bubbly in ancient Egypt, heavy stones, the island of Arizona in the Red Sea Pakistani Peridot as an almost near flawless internal structure, and the stone was reserved for some of the crystals reached by the 18th and 19th centuries, and a surprising number become a favorite choice without loss of color saturation, valued for its vivid hue and ability to take a fine polish. Commercial grade Peridot, but as industrial scale for collectors and cutters in the 20th century, it was a geological anomaly made gems far easier to access, diffusion, the sense of rarity attached to commercial grade stones spoke for itself. Faded. Getting to it, however, international gem trading platforms between 2023 the Sapit Valley deposit and 2024 4,500 wholesale price sea level for commercial grade Peridot by road flat. Miners cutting and shipping through the Ural Valley on horseback. In the mid to high end gear and food for days buyers have shifted towards saber mining operations are mostly manual, or output is limited not by geology, stones but by greater hardness, weather, clearer and logistics. At the lower early phase, Pakistani Peridot had a spotlight in a price-driven market. A suite of 54 match stones, totaling the result 350 carats, while it still has a secure place in affordable then jewelry, mounted in New York, thanks to steady supply, eventually exhibited by one of the world's most commercial-grade jewelry houses, no longer plays a role in that project demonstrated what this deposit could offer. With abundant output from Arizona, despite having one of the most promising sources of and no supply constraints on the horizon, Pakistan's gemstone there is little realistic prospect of significant price growth, fragmented regulation for collectors and a lack of certification infrastructure. It is one of the stones. While no formal sanctions ever targeted the steepest price drops in this year's gemstone market haven't come from exotic rarities. Routes into key export but from stones so familiar that many payment channels tightened. Buyers wary after a decade of geopolitical disruptions and increasing demand for traceability is a prime example. There were no dramatic distinctive yellow-green colors comes from iron, but over the past 5 years, the gem producing a narrow range of hues that high-end buyers often bypass without modern cutting centers, more varied tones, without lab-backed origin with a hardness of 6.5 to 7. Pakistani Peridot lost its competitive edge. Is durable enough. Traders began to favor smaller but scratch-resistant stones from other regions or beryl, even if the color and size limits its appeal for everyday wear. Today, the mine is still there. Markets. The stone modern still emerges is anchored in 3 major regions. But what was once a rising competitor to Burma's Spinel, mines on San Carlos is now mostly known to specialists. Have operated for decades. A gem of turning out steady volumes of commercial quietly waiting for conditions between to catch 1 and 3 with its value. Ranked 8th, Zircon, Cambodia. Nestled deep within the emerald forests of northeastern Cambodia, the earth preserves a secret, an ancient gem born in fire, long forgotten by mainstream markets. In Ratanakiri province, amid remnants of old volcanic systems, miners uncover a variety of zircon known for its remarkable transformation. Initially brown or reddish, these crystals undergo heat treatment to reveal a vivid, almost electric blue, a tone so luminous it once sparked waves of excitement in boutique gem circles. Zircon itself is among the oldest minerals ever dated, with samples older than 4 billion years. Its optical brilliance rivals far more expensive stones. High dispersion and refractive index give it a sharp, diamond-like sparkle. Not because it imitates anything, but because it simply is that bright. In the mountains of Cambodia, however, that brilliance emerges under humble conditions. Local villagers dig by hand, without machinery or geological mapping. Mining takes place in short seasonal windows, depending on the weather and farming cycles. The rough stones are passed through informal markets in Ban Lung, where brokers sort, weigh, and prepare selected pieces for heat treatment. It's all off record, outside official documentation, and largely untouched by modern supply chain systems. Despite its visual strength, Cambodian zircon faded from international trade for reasons that had little to do with quality. No embargo was imposed, no export ban applied, but the absence of traceability, combined with rising demands for source transparency and ethical certification, pushed this gem quietly out of favor. Retailers, especially in Europe and North America, began to avoid stones they couldn't verify, even if their optics were superior to more expensive alternatives. Today, Cambodian zircon exists in a liminal space. It's too beautiful to ignore, but too unsupported to scale. Traders in Bangkok still mention it. Lapidaries remember its fire, but few mainstream buyers know where it comes from, how it's mined, or why it's rarely seen. In a market that increasingly rewards clarity of origin over clarity of cut, this gem, though geologically exceptional, remain suspended in obscurity. Ranked 7th, Persian Turquoise, the sky blue gem lost to sanctions. Beyond arid mountains and centuries-old trade routes, a gem once celebrated as the finest on Earth quietly succumbed to the weight of modern politics. In northeastern Iran, near the ancient city of Nishapur, sits one of humanity's oldest gemstone treasures. Persian turquoise, with its flawless robin's egg blue, has been prized for millennia, adorning pharaohs, Sassanid royalty, and mosques alike. Its hue, pure, deep, and matrix-free, came to define what the world accepted as turquoise itself. This stone formed in shallow fractures within sedimentary volcanic rock, enriched by copper-laden groundwater over millennia. Its clarity and intensely stable sky blue, born from nature's alchemy, created a standard by which all other turquoise was judged, even influencing Persian miniature tilework, where mosques wore domes like the heavens on earth. Yet today, this legendary turquoise is almost invisible in global gem markets. It wasn't conflict or degradation that pushed it aside. Instead, it was the pressure of sanctions, banking restrictions, shipping limitations, and the risk of secondary penalties. Even authorized traders found it hard to ship pieces valued at a few $1,000s. With mounting compliance costs, many gem dealers in the US and Europe stopped sourcing Persian turquoise. Over time, less regulated but more accessible sources, such as dried-up mines in the American Southwest or mass-produced Chinese turquoise, filled the gap. The craftsmanship around turquoise in Iran persists. Cabinet makers in Isfahan still place these stones into delicate mosaics on copper vessels. Markets in Mashhad and Tehran display Firuze Kubi inlaid ware that glimmers with tradition. But the gem itself, the raw pride of Nishapur, now seldom reaches global collectors. What remains is not a stone that lost its color, but one that lost its pathway to the world. Persian turquoise endures, but in supply chains severed by politics, its cultural legacy intact, its market presence reduced. Ranked 6th, Ural Alexandrite, Russia's twin-color rarity, silenced by sanctions. In the shadow of the Ural peaks, a rare gemstone turned symbols of imperial power into a modern casualty, its brilliance now dimmed by geopolitics. Deep within the ancient metamorphic rocks of Russia's Ural Mountains, a gemstone emerged in the 1830s as a scientific marvel, Alexandrite. Its claim to fame was extraordinary but straightforward. It shifts from green in daylight to red under incandescent light, a unifying paradox of day and night visible in one crystal. Named after the future Tsar Alexander II, it became a symbol of imperial Russia with its vivid hues echoing national colors. These original Ural Alexandrites quickly set the standard for all specimens that followed. They were treasured not only for their dramatic color change, but also for their clarity and dense, crystalline structure, features rarely matched by later sources. Over time, deposits dwindled. New supplies from Brazil and Sri Lanka surfaced, but collectors still regarded Ural stones as the benchmark for quality. Fine Russian Alexandrites, especially those over 1 carat with strong color change, became exceptionally scarce and highly coveted. Despite their legacy, Ural Alexandrites are now all but absent from global markets. The issue wasn't just supply exhaustion, but also the weight of international sanctions and trade restrictions. Even existing inventories, once moving freely into auctions and high-end retailers, encountered unexpected barriers. Banking restrictions, licensing complexities, and cautious compliance frameworks that treated Russian gemstones as high risk. Markets in Europe and North America gradually withdraw, opting for more traceable, sanction-free sources, even if the optics fall short. Today, Ural Alexandrite is encountered chiefly through historic estate collections, not current stock. It remains a jewel of impeccable pedigree, but invisible in contemporary trade. Its counterpart from newer origins may carry similar chemistry and color change, but they lack provenance. The twin color phenomenon survives, brilliant, rare, scientifically fascinating, but its connection to the historic Ural source is fading, packaged behind records, policy walls, and a world that has moved on. Ranked 5th, Colombia's commercial emeralds, a wealth that faded behind policy walls. High in the Andes, beneath layers of ancient shale and tectonic fractures, lay a gem whose value once fueled fortunes, and whose access now hangs by evolving policy threads. Commercial-grade emeralds from Colombia, mined in the renowned belts of Muzo, Coscuez, and Chivor, have long set the global standard for green gemstones. These stones owe their signature color to trace amounts of chromium and vanadium seeping into sedimentary host shales across Boyaca and Cundinamarca over millions of years. Their clarity and grassy green sparkle, while not as rare as top-tier scores, fill jewelry cases worldwide and bring Colombia between 70 and 90% of the world's emerald supply. Just a few years ago, commercial per-carat wholesale prices ranged from around $500 up to $1,800. Accessible, but unmistakably Colombian. Yet today, the same trade faces friction, not from geopolitics, but from a convergence of environmental concern, market formalization, and shifting regulations. Muzo, dubbed the emerald capital of the world, now grapples with water contamination and forest erosion, wrought by both industrial and informal mining. Environmental repercussions have prompted stricter oversight, even as over 60% of mining remains informal. Users working with handheld tools in critical areas like the Itico riverbed, known locally as guaqueros, continue to operate in conditions that draw official scrutiny. Meanwhile, global demand for traceability is rising. Buyers in Western markets now expect certifications, chain of custody reports, origin traceability, and safe export licensing. Formal cutting centers in Bogotá have stepped up, introducing certification systems and transparency protocols to ensure the supply chain is legal and responsible. However, increased operational costs and elevated compliance requirements have slowed the volume of commercial-grade exports, especially to cautious markets focused on ethical sourcing. As a result, while Colombia still exports over $160 million worth of emeralds annually, demand has shifted. Collectors and brands seeking affordability are pivoting toward emerging alternatives, often at the expense of Colombian stones. The country's emeralds still dominate by volume, but not always by accessibility. Today, Colombian commercial emeralds await a bridge between tradition and transparency. Their legacy endures beneath Andean soil and in the hearts of trading families. But to return to jewelry cases globally, not merely as relics of past demand, but as current choices, they must carry more than color. They must have credibility. Ranked fourth, Tanzanite from Tanzania, a blue treasure trapped by its own value. On the shadowed slopes of Kilimanjaro, a striking gemstone emerged, defined by its singular origin and unmatched hue, yet hemmed in by its fragility as a national asset. Deep within the Marilani Hills of northern Tanzania, discovered in 1967, lies the only known deposit Tanzanite was the stone the world didn't expect, a blue-violet variety of zoisite, and couldn't forget, whose formation a crystal with a rare convergence between geology, violet, and tectonic blue energy. And burgundy. Born like roughly 585 million years ago, it's so rare. It occupies a narrow swath of only one place, making each stone as exclusive as its origin. It rivals when first discovered in 1967, and so its velvety electric tone it ignited captured the world's fascination in less than a decade. Not least because for jewelers, it was a dream place on Earth. For investors, despite the gemstone's allure, and for Tanzania, a long struggle to translate scarcity into economic strength. But decades ago, when rough Tanzanite was routinely exported uncut, raw Tanzanite often rarely forms with the vivid color shown in catalogs. While this generated exports, in its natural lion's share of value, the stone is often cutting dull, margins and yellow-brown left the country with green or gray. In response, the government enacted a ban on rough exports over 1 gram in 2010. When done right, the result is foster domestic cutting. When pushed too far, and increase local revenues. Something else entirely. However, implementation over the last 2 decades, a hidden race most began stones to meet roughly 90%. To make still stones appear deeper in color, partly due to limited processing infrastructure, to simulate rarity, a lack of technical expertise, and logistical challenges flooded the global market. Meanwhile, stones with flawless color, but no India became the world's leading stones exporter that gleamed under showcase lights, dwarfing Tanzania's output, even though the gem came only from Marilani. And worst of all, stones smuggling and that were indistinguishable from synthetic perimeter wall built around the mining zone. Buyers caught on to curb leakages. Reports surfaced of market stones visibility for Tanzanian supply slipped. not due to legal restriction or geopolitical sanction. Mines are cutting corners to keep exports flowing in ways Tanzania and when the word Tanzanite began appearing on mass-market costume jewelry, endures as both an emblem of geological rarity prices dropped by 40% across wholesale potential. Collectors high-quality stones, major retailers especially investment-grade blue violets, still command attention among collectors. And even most global jewelry brands now source once offered in velvet intermediary now appeared in clearance rather than directly from the mine. This was never a synthetic rich heritage remains in artisanal communities and mining families. Just a rare gem. The gem's place in international trade is shaped more by policy gaps and infrastructure limitations from velvet's color to scarcity. Ranked third, Mogok Spinel, a flame-tinted gem smothered by conflict. In a valley long celebrated as the cradle of Asia's finest gemstones, one of its brightest treasures now moves in silence, without ceremony, without name. Among the marble ridges of the Mogok Valley in Upper Myanmar, a gemstone once mistaken for ruby built its reputation through quiet resilience. Spinel, naturally formed magnesium aluminium oxide, emerges here with an optical precision unmatched by almost any other source on Earth. While different regions offer spinel in lavender, orange, or brown tones, Mogok stones, especially in pigeon's blood red, were so pure, so vivid, that for centuries they were sold as rubies, even to royalty. The famous Black Prince's ruby in the British crown? Spinel. For much of history, no one questioned its identity, only its beauty. The geology behind it is unique. Mogok's spinels crystallize in calcite marbles through high-grade metamorphism, yielding transparent octahedrons, often inclusion-free, and displaying a spectral dispersion rivaling that of sapphire. For gem cutters, it was one of the few red stones that could be faceted without treatment. For jewelers, it was a reliable substitute when rubies became unaffordable. For traders, it was a gem that traveled the world without explanation, until that world changed. Since the 2021 military coup, Myanmar's gemstone trade has undergone a fragmentation more severe than any market correction. Western sanctions, especially from the US and UK, targeted the state-owned Myanmar Gems Enterprise, MGE, which officially oversees all legal mining and licensing activity. As a result, formal trade in Mogok Spinel collapsed. Major auctions were canceled. Export channels froze. Mines that once produced hundreds of kilos a year now operate in partial silence. Some abandoned entirely, others maintained under shifting local control, or militarized zones inaccessible to traders. The vacuum left behind was quickly filled, not by reform, but by improvisation. Stones now leave the country through informal channels, often hand-carried through Shan State into northern Thailand, where they're relabeled, mixed with non-Burmese stock, and fed into global markets under obscured origin. Reputable jewelers hesitate. Certification labs grow cautious. Even for stones with ideal clarity and color, the absence of traceability has turned Mogok Spinel from premium to problematic. And yet the stone itself hasn't changed. The reds are still there. The chemistry still speaks to the valley's metamorphic history. The cutting traditions survive among families who've worked with spinel for generations. But the global visibility of Mogok's spinel, once on the rise thanks to demand for untreated, rare, ethically clean-colored stones, has diminished, not from oversupply, not from market fatigue, but because the systems needed to support it, stability, documentation, peace, are no longer in place. In 2025, Burmese spinel is still traded, still worn and still admired. But for every carat that reaches auction, there are dozens more moving without name, without provenance, and without the place that once made them world-class. Ranked second, Myanmar Jadeite, the green promise buried beneath conflict. For centuries, this gemstone marked dynasties, but in today's world, its glow reveals not prestige, but power, and what must be paid to hold it. In the misted uplands of northern Myanmar, layered between serpentine rocks and ancient fault zones, lies the world's most coveted jadeite. Not just jade, but imperial quality, chromium-rich jadeite, with a texture so fine it seems to glow from within. For millennia, this stone defined status in East Asia, reserved not for nobility, but for emperors. In China, the term fei acqui came to mean only one thing: Jade from Myanmar. The most prized specimens, those with vibrant translucency and uniform imperial green color, come from a singular geological corridor near Aitpakant in Kachin State. These jadeite boulders formed under rare pressure-temperature conditions that exist nowhere else in commercial quantities. They're pulled from riverbeds, mountainsides, and deep beneath the rainforest, often hidden beneath a thick oxidized skin that conceals the quality within. Each one a gamble. Historically, this region was both a treasure and a battlefield. Colonial powers mapped it, warlords taxed it, but only in recent decades did jadeite become a revenue engine of global scale, accounting for billions annually, most of it exported to China. This export, however, rarely followed conventional trade routes. Even when the Myanmar Gems Enterprise, MGE, attempted to control auctions and licenses, much of the highest quality jade bypassed state systems entirely, sold through gray market deals, often linked to military and insurgent financing. After the 2021 military coup, jade's role shifted from lucrative to strategic. Mines in Aitpakant, once operating under local arrangements, came under direct control of military-linked companies or affiliates. That control came with consequences. Landslides became routine, some catastrophic. In 2023 alone, dozens of informal miners died in a single collapse. Safety regulations were unenforced. Child labor and displacement escalated. Jadeite, once a symbol of harmony in Asian cultures, now funds arms, logistics, and factional consolidation. The international community responded. The U.S. reimposed sanctions on MGE. The U.K. followed. Major auction houses stopped accepting jade of uncertain provenance, but the stone remained in demand. Chinese appetite did not slow. New intermediary companies emerged. Stones were routed through intermediaries in Yunnan, relabeled, repackaged, and sold again. While the sanctions were clear, enforcement blurred across borders. Today, Myanmar Jadeite still defines the high-end market in China. Retail buyers may ask for color, texture, translucency, but rarely for sourcing. Meanwhile, in Western markets, jadeite has receded almost entirely, not for lack of beauty, but for lack of paperwork. What remains is a national resource trapped between value and volatility. The stone itself hasn't changed. Its glow still pulses through deep green veins when cut and polished. But now each carat carries weight beyond price. The legacy of a culture, the consequence of a war, and the silence of a trade that no longer speaks its name. In first place, Russian diamonds, the sparkle that sanctions shadowed. Beneath the permafrost of the Sakha Republic, Russian diamonds form in some of the oldest kimberlite pipes on Earth. Alrosa, the country's state-linked diamond giant, commands over 90% of Russia's diamond production and nearly 25% of the world's rough supply. Their operations span hundreds of kilometers, from the gaping Mir mine, long closed due to flooding, to the Udagnaya pit in Nurba's underground expansion. These are among the deepest and coldest diamond mines in the world, producing millions of carats annually, mainly destined for India's cutting centers and global retailers. For decades, the trade flowed quietly. Russian diamonds filled engagement rings across Europe, and the U.S. Alrosa's rough was auctioned in Antwerp and Hong Kong. Even amid political tension, the stone itself stayed neutral. That changed in 2022. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a coordinated wave of sanctions began to take shape, first targeting state banks, oil, and oligarch-linked industries. Then came the diamond sector. By 2023, the U.S. will formally ban the import of Russian diamonds over 1 carat, but these restrictions were limited in scope, with most Russian rough still moving indirectly through India or Dubai. That loophole began closing in 2024, when the G7 and EU enacted broader bans, not only on direct imports but on stones of Russian origin, even if cut elsewhere. As of September 1, 2024, diamonds above 0.5 carats require fully traceable documentation. By March 2025, all Russian origin diamonds were effectively blocked from entry into Europe and the US, regardless of transformation or ownership path. The impact was immediate. Alrosa's revenue fell 26% year over year in 2024. Net profits dropped over 77%. The company suspended key auctions, delayed planned expansions, and in mid-2025, sold its 41% stake in the Kataka mine in Angola, a significant move to restructure foreign holdings under pressure. Domestic stockpiles grew. Unsold rough sat in warehouses. Cutting centers in Surat, long reliant on Russian supply, faced shortfalls, layoffs, and reduced work weeks. To preserve liquidity, Alrosa shifted to state-backed buyers and began offloading low-grade parcels to alternative markets. But the damage wasn't just financial. Russian diamonds became non-compliant in the eyes of luxury brands. Major groups like Richemont, Signet, and Tiffany's began issuing sourcing guidelines, barring any stones linked to sanctioned entities. Even auctions for vintage diamonds saw disclosures tighten. Labs like GIA and HRD Antwerp updated origin tracing procedures. Russian stones, once globally accepted, now sat under permanent suspicion. Yet beneath the political freeze, the mines still run. Karats are still extracted from the Siberian tundra, sorted, graded, and sold, just not where they used to go. Much of this rough is now rerouted to less regulated buyers in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Some stones are cut in small private workshops, then re-entered into global streams without reliable provenance. The physical diamond is unchanged, but the certificate, the route, and the buyer have all shifted. Russian diamonds in 2025 are no longer a question of beauty, clarity, or price. It's a question of visibility, of paperwork. The question is whether a retailer in Paris or New York can risk showing a stone whose origin might be audited, disputed, or sanctioned. Alrosa still produces tens of millions of carats, but more than ever, they're being sold in quiet deals, closed markets, in opaque corridors, where value is less about what the stone shows and more about what the certificate doesn't say. Value doesn't disappear. It moves, sometimes underground, sometimes on paper. In the world of gemstones, sanctions don't erase beauty, they erase visibility. What couldn't be traced was sidelined. What couldn't be certified was replaced. But in every case you've seen, the stone itself didn't change. Only the systems around it did. That's what makes this list different. It isn't about market crashes. It's about what happens when politics, ethics, and trade collide, and how even a flawless gem can be declared untradeable. Let us know which one resonates with you in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.